At 1:40 a.m., a U.S. guided missile destroyer in the eastern Strait of Hormuz detected a surface contact, moving at 28 knots and accelerating toward its convoy. The contact was broadcasting as the Marvan Shirin, an Iranian cargo ship that was supposedly sailing from Bandar Abbas to Pakistan. There was a single inconsistency. The Marvan Shirin had been scrapped at a breaker's yard in India in October 2019. The ship that closed on the American convoy did not officially exist. Amid dense electronic clutter in Hormuz, the commander still lacked critical data. He couldn't tell if he faced an Iranian fast attack boat, a disguised commercial vessel, or simply an unreliable sensor readout. Radar displayed phantom targets. AIS returns had mismatched identities. Even ESM signatures lost authenticity, real signals drowned by chaos. It was a cascade failure, every sensor faltered. In 3 minutes, he would have a firing solution. 2 minutes later, the contact might force a decision about using weapons. Static filled his radio. Ghost ships clogged his AIS. His GPS had recently reported his ship as being almost 2 miles from its actual position. The Strait of Hormuz was not calm because the ceasefire was not held. It was calm because both sides had become too blind to escalate cleanly. That night, the only barrier preventing electronic confusion from turning into open fire was not a missile system, a diplomatic line, or any escalation protocol. It was as basic as a light switch. Someone had to decide whether to escalate, despite the technical confusion. When the Marvan Shirin contact showed up on the destroyer's radar, the US Navy's Project Freedom escort mission had been going for 11 days. The plan was clear. US ships would escort neutral commercial vessels through the Strait of Hormuz. Since the war started in February, Iran has basically closed the strait to any ship it has not approved. The ceasefire, agreed to on April 8 and quickly challenged by both sides, did not settle who controlled the strait. Iran claimed the IRGC Navy was in charge. The United States said international law was in charge. The IRGC enforced its claim with fast attack boats, mines, and drone strikes. The US enforced its claim with guided missile destroyers and F/A-18s. The rules of engagement allowed them to destroy Iranian naval vessels if they acted in a hostile manner or showed hostile intent toward a convoy. The rules of engagement were unequivocal. The sensor picture was not. On May 5, commercial maritime intelligence platforms identified 167 vessels in the Strait of Hormuz. Of these, 146 were not transmitting AIS. These sightings and oddities came from satellite images, commercial AIS data, and signals intelligence monitoring of VHF and AIS transmissions. Among the ships that did transmit, more were using false identities. Some did not exist. Some appeared in the wrong ocean. Some had destinations replaced with political messages in Farsi. At one point, 6 ships in a 12-mile stretch showed the same IMO number. The electronic environment had become so confusing that professional sailors began using a word in their reports and private conversations that does not appear in official naval language: incomprehensible. GPS jamming came from areas near Fujairah and several spots along the Iranian coast. It made ships appear to be at airports, on land, or even inside a nuclear power plant. The destroyer's crew had to fix their navigation picture 4 times during the last watch. They checked the radar against what they could see. At one point, the difference between GPS and real position was as much as 1.8 nautical miles. In the Strait of Hormuz, 1.8 nautical miles means the difference between international waters and Iranian territorial waters. The watch officer stared at the contact bearing 347 and did not immediately reach for the intercom. He spent 11 seconds doing what doctrine says you should not do in a fast-developing surface threat scenario. He thought, 12 nautical miles to the northeast, in a rigid-hull inflatable boat running without lights, an IRGC fast attack craft commander was also thinking. His name is not known. CENTCOM later assessed his rank as equivalent to a lieutenant. His boat was part of a formation of fast craft that left a staging point near Sirik about 40 minutes earlier. They operated under orders to intercept any vessel trying to transit the northern corridor without authorization. Unauthorized meant any vessel not on the IRGC's approved transit list. That list was already 3 weeks out of date because the officer who kept it had been killed in a US airstrike on April 18. His GPS showed a position 2.3 nautical miles from where he actually was. He knew this because he saw a point on the coast of Keshem Island that his GPS said was 3 miles ahead. It was not 3 miles away, it was right in front of him. He navigated by dead reckoning. He steered by dead reckoning at 28 knots. He faced GPS jamming, a fractured command chain, and outdated orders. This barely qualified as navigation. It is only informed guesswork, not exact calculation. His radar showed a group of contacts in the southern corridor along Omani waters. Ships used this route to avoid the IRGC. The group moved north at about 12 knots. To the IRGC, any vessel heading north at night through the southern corridor without approval was a sanctions runner, a tanker carrying crude, to a buyer who paid the US price instead of the IRGC transit toll. His standing orders were to intercept and turn back sanctions runners. He accelerated. Neither the US destroyer nor the IRGC commander clearly understood the other's actions. The US ship saw a ghost vessel moving at 28 knots on an intercept course. The IRGC commander observed a group of radar contacts he could not classify as commercial or military. Between them, the MV Alliance Fairfax, a Maersk container ship and the first commercial vessel to transit under US escort, moved at 12 knots. The two forces would meet in about 4 minutes. The destroyer's commanding officer was on the bridge at 1:43 a.m. The watch officer had told him about the contact, Ghost AIS, high speed, and a narrowing bearing. He reached the bridge in less than 90 seconds. He had a targeting solution ready. The ship's Mk-45 5-inch gun aimed at the contact's expected location. His spy radar tracked the contact despite GPS interference. The radar image was clear, the contact's identity remained unknown. He was tracking a vessel that did not officially exist. Moving at 28 knots toward a convoy, he was required to defend under the rules of engagement. The ROE language was specific. A vessel demonstrating hostile intent toward an escorted commercial ship could be engaged. Hostile intent was defined by 3 criteria: closing bearing, high speed, and failure to respond to verbal challenge. He picked up the radio. Channel 16 is the international distress and calling frequency. Unknown vessel bearing 347. This is a United States Navy warship operating under Project Freedom Escort Authority. You are on a collision course with a protected convoy. Identify yourself and alter course immediately. Static. GPS jamming clusters create interference on VHF in the near field. The transmission went out. What came back was nothing intelligible. The IRGC commander, closing from the northeast, heard something on channel 16 but could not make out the language through the interference. His radar showed only a cluster of commercial contacts ahead. The radar did not show a US warship or any warship. The destroyer's radar cross-section minimization and its course relative to the sea clutter kept it below the fast craft's detection threshold. He was driving toward what, on his screen, appeared to be unescorted commercial traffic. Here is the analytical problem. The after-action review would spend 6 weeks trying to articulate cleanly. What happened in the Strait of Hormuz that night was not a failure of will, doctrine, or training. It was a failure of the shared information environment that enabled doctrine to become operational. US rules of engagement assume a US commander can identify what he is engaging. IRGC orders assume an IRGC commander can identify what he is intercepting. Both sides need basic navigation and identification data. They need GPS coordinates within a reasonable margin of error. Both also need AIS returns that match reality and radar images that show military or commercial ships. Every baseline steadily eroded under 2 months of relentless electronic warfare in a 33 nautical mile strait. Now, GPS jamming from Iran to protect its ships and disrupt US and commercial navigation has made the electronic environment messy for everyone. It hurt Iran's own awareness as much as the American. Iran used electronic warfare as a weapon, but it did not see that damaging information can hurt everyone, even its own forces. What happened that night teaches a clear lesson. If electronic warfare is not kept in check, it can backfire, making your own forces less effective and less safe, just as the enemy's are. For Iran, excessive GPS jamming and AIS spoofing made it harder to control the area and raised the risk of accidental escalation, as both sides could mistake each other. For the US, depending on sensors made them vulnerable when the information became too unreliable for good decisions. Both sides learned that without reliable navigation and identification, rules of engagement become unclear, and people have to rely on judgment. In the future, operations in contested areas need to plan for the risk of losing information, use backups, visual signals, and clear fallback steps before improvising. The IRGC commander was not an unauthorized operator. He was operating correctly within his degraded understanding of a situation that the electronic environment had made impossible to understand. And he was about to intercept a vessel whose escort he could not see, whose nationality he had not identified, and whose rules of engagement allowed it to shoot him if he got close enough. Signal picture, unreliable. Contact classification, unresolved. Time to weapons range, falling. The destroyer's commanding officer had a decision to make, and he had a narrow window to make it in. He estimated roughly 2 minutes before the IRGC contact reached a range at which visual identification might become possible from his bridge, and approximately 4 minutes before the contact reached the Alliance Fairfax's position. He did not fire. He did something that was not in the engagement protocol, but was not forbidden either. It was a decision made in the space between official rules and personal judgment that, in any other situation, would have seemed ordinary. He turned on his searchlights. Two 24-inch xenon battle lanterns were mounted on the destroyer's bridge wings, both facing north-northeast. Across 12 nautical miles of dark water, with GPS jamming, AIS spoofing, and almost no shared navigational reality, a US warship announced its presence the same way mariners have done for 200 years, with light, visible to the naked eye at roughly 10 nautical miles. The IRGC commander saw it at 9:30. He had no rules for dealing with a searchlight. His standing orders covered radar contacts, AIS identified ships, and vessels that answered VHF calls. They did not mention a warship using searchlights in the strait because no one had written such an order, and no one had expected the electronic environment would get so bad that searchlights would be the most reliable way to identify a ship. He cut his throttle. His boat dropped from 28 knots to 8 in approximately 40 seconds. At 1:51 a.m., he altered course to the east, away from the convoy, away from the destroyer's beam. The US destroyer tracked the contact's new course for 19 minutes. It did not fire. The contact merged into radar clutter near the Quesham Island coastline at 2:10 a.m. The Alliance Fairfax completed its transit at 4:40 a.m. No incident was reported. The incident was logged internally at CENTCOM and appears, in heavily redacted form, in a classified operational summary. No public statement was issued. Project Freedom's public communications for that date noted a routine transit and made no reference to a contact event in the Eastern Corridor. The classified summary noted, though the public communications did not, that the commanding officer's choice to turn on the searchlights had no precedent in the current rules of engagement. It was not covered by any protocol in the Project Freedom operational order and had no legal or doctrinal status as either an escalation or de-escalation. It was the instinct of a commanding officer with 23 years of naval service, working in conditions so bad that the safest way to de-escalate was simply to turn on a light. No policy paper, congressional briefing, or public report on the Hormuz crisis has talked about this directly. The main point is that when electronic warfare destroys the shared reality, both sides need to make decisions, which creates a weakness for both, which acts as a temporary brake on escalation, not because of restraint, but because of confusion and loss of control. Both sides are left uncertain, so accidents and mistakes become more likely, and any return to clarity could quickly end this fragile, accidental stability. Realizing that blocking information can slow escalation by accident as much as by design reveals a key weakness. As soon as one side regains clarity, restraint disappears, and the risk of conflict rises quickly. The ceasefire in the Strait of Hormuz is not being maintained by diplomacy. Iran and the US do not agree on what the ceasefire permits. They have irreconcilable definitions of who controls the strait, what constitutes a violation, and what the other party's naval movements mean. Every IRGC fast craft interception that the US views as a ceasefire violation, Iran views as legitimate enforcement of a transit authorization system. Every US escort operation that Iran views as a ceasefire violation, the US views as legitimate freedom of navigation. There is no shared text, there is no hotline that works reliably through the jamming, there is no common picture. What is keeping the ceasefire going imperfectly, temporarily, and at great risk is that the electromagnetic environment Iran created has slowed down both sides at the same time. The IRGC cannot carry out quick, coordinated interceptions when its GPS is corrupted and its command chain has been hit by airstrikes. The US cannot establish clear rules of engagement when its AIS is full of ghost ships and its radar contacts lack reliable identity. Both forces are operating at lower effectiveness. The friction is mutual. Mutual friction, with no other ceasefire mechanism in place, is acting as an accidental restraint. This is not a stable situation. It only lasts as long as both sides stay confused, slow, and uncertain enough to avoid crossing the line. As soon as one side gets enough sensor clarity to act confidently, whether by using a new electronic warfare system, fixing key jamming nodes, or a weather change that helps radar and signals the restraint quickly disappears. Going forward, analysts need to consider what might happen if the electronic environment changes. If either side gets better counter-jamming technology or learns to handle interference, things could move faster, making armed clashes more likely. A sudden breakthrough, like secure satellite navigation or new sensor fusion, could give one side a clear advantage while the other stays in the dark. This would not just end the current restraint, but could also lead to preemptive action based on new confidence. If outside actors step in by restoring communication or increasing awareness on one side, the unstable balance could break quickly. In all these cases, getting clear information back would remove the accidental brake on escalation and raise the risk of a swift, decisive conflict. And the decision that almost happened at 1:51 a.m. happens for real, faster, with better targeting data, and no time for a light switch. The Marvin Shirin, the ship that never existed, is still appearing on AIS feeds in the Strait of Hormuz. As of the last publicly available maritime intelligence snapshot, it had been spotted in 3 different locations simultaneously off Larak Island, near the northern corridor, and drifting at anchor approximately 14 miles east of Keshem. It carries no cargo. It has no crew. It occupies no water. It is an identity, a number. A 6-character call sign used by any boat that wants to hide what it really is in a strait where pretending to be something else has become a survival strategy for everyone, whether military, commercial, or anyone else. The commanding officer of the US destroyer filed his incident report at 6 a.m. Under the field marked Contact Classification, he wrote, Unknown. Under Outcome, he wrote, No engagement. He did not have a field for how close.